Hey there, welcome to YouTube. If you are into poetry, if you are into literature, if you are into cultural history, then you've come to the right place. Cardboard Box Productions makes podcasts about all those things, so be sure to click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you never miss a new episode. Obviously, we mostly make podcasts, so you can also go to anywhere you get your podcasts, if it's a place other than YouTube, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and you can subscribe to our podcast feeds there. All right, I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to Close Talking, the world's most popular poetry analysis podcast from Cardboard Box Productions Incorporated. I am co-host Jack Rossiter Munley, and with my good friend Connor McNamara Stratton, we read a poem,
talk about the poem,
and read the poem again.
Before we get into today's selection, a quick note that if you like what we do here at Close Talking and have a spare minute of your time, it would mean the world to us if you would give the podcast a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Those ratings and reviews help boost us up the algorithm and find new listeners.
And if you have suggestions for future episodes or comments on this one, you can send us an email at closetalkingpoetry@gmail.com.
And you can also find us on social media. On Twitter, the show is at Close Talking. I am at Jack Rossiter Munn, and Connor is at Connor M. Stratton. On Instagram, the show is at Close Talking Poetry, and on Facebook, it's facebook.com/Close Talking. We also have a website, closetalking.com, where you can find all the past episodes of the show, and Cardboard Box Productions has just launched a newsletter, Unboxed, and if you go to cardboardboxproductionsinc.com, you can subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stuff on Close Talking and all of the other literary and cultural history podcasts that Cardboard Box Productions makes. On with the show. Hello, and welcome to an all-new episode of Close Talking. I'm Jack Rossiter Munley, one of your co-hosts.
And I'm, Connor McNamara Stratton. Another one. There goes. Speaking in a falsetto. Terrible.
Hey, it's Connor Jack. I almost forgot to say my name, so just however you say it, that's good. Because I really did. I was just like, oh, here we are. Today we got a great one for you. It is called Poplar Street by Chen Chen. He is blowing up all over the place, super, super big time. Won the Joyce Carol Oates Award in 2011, longlisted for the National Book Award in 2017 for When I Grow Up, I Want to Be a List of Future Possibilities. Just doing some great stuff and getting recognized for it, which is also pretty great.
This poem, Poplar Street, Jack picked out, was published in Poetry Magazine in 2015, and it is really good.
Yeah, June of 2015, coming straight at you from Poetry Magazine.
Ooh, a little couplet for your troubles.
Yeah, more like 20 magazine. Yeah, coming at you live from 20 Great Teen. Here we go. Anyway, this is Poplar Street by Chen Chen. Oh, sorry. Hello. Are you on your way to work too? I was just taken aback by how you also have a briefcase, also small and brown. I was taken by how you seem secretly to love everything. Are you my new coworker? Oh, I see. No. Still good to meet you. I'm trying out this thing where it's good to meet people. Maybe beyond briefcases, we have some things in common. I like jelly beans. I'm afraid of death. I'm afraid of farting, even around people I love. Do you think your mother loves you when you fart? Does your mother love you all the time? Have you ever doubted? I like that the street we're on is named after a tree, when there are none, poplar or otherwise. I wonder if a tree has ever been named after a street, whether that worked out. If I were a street, I hope I'd get a good name, not Main or One Way. One night, I ran out of an apartment down North Pleasant Street. It was soft and neighborly, with pines and oaks. It felt too hopeful after what happened. After my mother's love became doubtful, After I told her I liked a boy, and she wished I'd never been born. After she said she was afraid of me, terrified I might infect my brothers with my abnormality. Sometimes, parents and children become the most common strangers. Eventually, a street appears where they can meet again. Or not. I've doubted my own love for my mother. I doubt. Do I have to forgive in order to love? Or do I have to love for forgiveness to even be possible? What do you think? I'm trying out this thing where questions about love and forgiveness are a form of work I'd rather not do alone. I'm trying to say, let's put our briefcases on our heads in the sudden rain and continue meeting as if we've just been given our names.
That's a good one.
What a great poem.
Yeah. There's a lot going on.
There's a whole lot going on. I don't know. Where do you want to start?
Oh, man. Gosh. Well, for one, this poem is funny.
It is very funny.
It's the tone, I guess, like, to me, the immediate register is its humor and its colloquial diction begins, oh, sorry, hello. That kind of talking brings us immediately into the spoken, like this poem is not written and it's happening in real time. The sorry, hello, we're meant to imagine bumping into someone as the words are progressing.
Well, it draws the reader in instantly because it's literally conversational. You as the reader are getting asked a bunch of questions right away. You are suddenly standing there on the street with the poet. At least that's how I felt reading it.
Yeah. No, definitely.
Which creates this real, even though you're strangers, there's this crazy intimacy that happens almost instantaneously.
Yeah. No, I agree. And yeah, and that's sort of sustained. And, are you my new coworker? Oh, I see. No. And then, you imagine you've responded somehow. You find yourself like, oh, I responded. Like, I don't know. I did a little thing in my head. Oh, I did respond.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot like, even though you're involved with it, it's a lot like those comedy bits where you only hear half of a phone conversation. Somebody's on the phone and they're like, we have no vacancies. And then they suddenly roll their eyes at you because you can see on their desk it says like 10 vacancies or something.
Yes.
It's almost that kind of humor. Like a lot of the humor comes out of you not knowing your own responses.
Yeah, no, that's right. Which is like this is actually even better than those comedy bits because it's like you're the one on the other line rather than like in the comedy bits, someone else is on the other line that you don't know, but you are, and somehow you're doing something. The poem is suggesting that you're doing something even though you don't have any idea what you're doing. And yeah, and that's just I don't think I've really seen that in a poem, or certainly not in this kind of way. And then it's just like, and there's a great, a lot of good reasons for this, but it's just very funny. It's hilarious. I mean, the line breaks. It's nice to see a poem use the tricks of poetry to be funny. I mean, we have some things in common. I like jelly beans. I'm afraid of death. I'm afraid, line break, of farting, even around people I love. Do you think your mother, line break, loves you when you fart? And, we are all like, where's the fart going to come? And then it comes, and then you're like, oh, that's a fart.
It's really good. Also, even in that part, which is the most explicitly funny, the seeds of the more serious are being sown. So I like jelly beans. I'm afraid of death. Like that's the first hint for me, at least, that this is getting serious at some point, because those are on a basic level. You just meet somebody. Those are big things like, hey, you pay taxes, like they're big. Like, I like jelly beans. Oh, you're a Skittles person, whatever. I'm afraid of death. Aren't we all? It works on that level, but it also hints at like maybe this seemingly glancing humorous interaction is going somewhere else.
Yeah, no, totally. This makes me think of the way that I found helpful to think about this is recently the writer Chris Abani came to the U and was talking with our class, and he's a great novelist, a poet, and essayist, but he was talking about narrative, and he says a lot of like big statements that sound amazing and then seem quickly unverifiable. But he said the narrative logic of anything is governed by what the deepest wound of the protagonist is, which is kind of a way of thinking about how conflict develops. And so for me, I don't know if that's exactly always true, but for me, it seemed be a helpful way to read this poem, because the poem is kind of misdirecting you a lot of times and like hinting at dark things and then getting funny. And it's sort of like, why are we digressing? But if you think about it in terms of, maybe what the deepest wound is, that I found like that a helpful frame. And so for here, at least I think one of them, maybe there's one deeper, is this this moment where, after my mother's love became doubtful, after I told her I liked a boy and she wished I had never been born, after she said she was afraid of me, terrified I might infect my brothers with my abnormality. It's hard to think of. That's just in the poem, but also generally, that sort of rejection of the mother, and because of your identity, and that sort of homophobic response from the person who raised you, is just so deep. And so for me, I was interested on the way that the poem got there was revealing. One example of this is right after that hilarious, which is like the funniest part, like, I'm afraid of farting even around people I love. And then, do you think your mother loves you when you fart? Which is like sort of funny and then sort of serious. And then, do you think does your mother love you all the time? Have you ever doubted? And that's pretty serious, but not yet the deepest part, and still a question, and you don't quite know where that question is coming from. But then right after, we get this seemingly another misdirect. I like that the street we're on is named after a tree, even though there's no trees, like there are none, poplar or otherwise. And so then we've been given a little seed, and then we're being pushed in another direction. But those are sort of necessary, I think, because of the sort of one way I think about it is because of the metaphorical apparatus that Chen Chen is using to make sense of this deep wound. And if you look at the end of the poem, the big things that are kind of like used at the end are sort of names, strangers, love and forgiveness, and streets. And and continue meeting as if we've just been given our names. And I think that one thing that's interesting is the way that the seemingly like arbitrary features of the beginning become the essential tools for the metaphors that Chen Chen is using to make sense of this wound. For one big example is the whole premise of running into someone and you being a stranger. And then this kind of resolution, the deep cut of that line, sometimes parents and children become the most common strangers. And then the moment where this thing where questions about love and forgiveness are a form of work I'd rather not do alone. And then let's continue meeting as if we've just been given our names. And that's so great because it's like where we're strangers to ourselves in a way. that kind of given our names. And so the idea of what a stranger or what a new or fresh kind of opportunity for engagement can offer becomes the essential resolution to this wound. But it's sort of like set up seemingly in a kind of like flippant way.
Yeah, those echoes are pretty powerful. Also, the mention at the beginning of "Are you my coworker?" and then at the end saying questions about love and forgiveness are a form of work I'd rather not do alone. That echo as well of work and coworker, and you sort of in the interaction, it's never labeled as a coworker, but you feel a little bit in the reading of the poem like that's where you're at.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and then also that redirect, I like the street we're on is named after a tree. That ends up serving two purposes. One is it leads into the sort of like literal event of the wound. So one night I ran out of an apartment down North Pleasant Street. It was soft and neighborly with pines and oaks. It felt too hopeful after what happened, after my mother's love became doubtful, after I told her I liked a boy and she wished I had never been born. So the street, which starts as just kind of like a little silly thought experiment, becomes like how the speaker is remembering this sort of devastating moment, which is also further signified with that use of anaphora of the repetition of after. That's how I think the poet is sort of cueing us in that we're getting somewhere in kind of a subtle way. But also that streets, it's kind of like the whole thing about them is their names. And so like Poplar Street is silly because there's no trees. Pleasant Street is silly because that's where the shit went down. And then like have trees been named after streets, and if that worked out. And then the end is kind of like, let's continue to meet as if we've just been given our names. And that metaphor works in part because we've been thinking about naming without realizing it had a deeper purpose for so long.
And it's also what happens when you meet a stranger, right? You don't know each other's names. You are two people meeting, and then you literally give yourself a name when you meet somebody who you've never met before.
Yeah.
It's usually your own name, but hopefully it's your own name and you're not some kind of weird con artist. But that is True. How like meeting strangers goes. You give yourself a name. You say, "Hey, it's me. I'm this person," which is kind of neat. It's interesting that you mentioned the narrative logic coming from the deepest wound, because that really is how it goes. And for me, at least, the switch in the poem from the more jokey part to the more serious comes right at the section you just mentioned, where it's after what happened, after my mother's love. I feel like that line is really where the switch fully occurs, because even it's no longer jokey, but it was soft and neighborly with pines and oaks. It felt too hopeful. And then the switch after what happened. Oh, we're really getting into what's going on here. It reminds me a little bit, now that we're talking about it like this, of particularly the film version of Everything is Illuminated. The Jonathan Safran Foer book, which is a very good book, but particularly the shift in the movie from very jokey and very funny into gradually more serious, which does happen in the book, but I think it happens a little bit more explicitly in the film version, is very similar to this. There's a lot of funny stuff that goes on, particularly in the character of the translator, who he asks Jonathan in the movie if he was close to his grandfather, but he says, "You are very proximal to your grandfather, no?" And he always says proximal to being close. Little stuff like that. It's like all throughout the beginning of the movie, there's like tons of jokes like that. And then by the end of it, it's this very heavy, meaningful story that still works. It still flows from the same places. It's the same characters. He still says proximal instead of close, but now it's not funny anymore. It's just they're connecting. And I feel like the same journey happens in this poem.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And that makes me think, I mean, yeah, I love that you brought up the switch between sort of the funny and the serious. And it makes me think about like one of poems, and also like on the one hand, I think to myself that it's sort of weird to talk about this poem in terms of narrative logic, because it's like the story, there's like the two stories. One is the encounter, quote unquote, with this, like the reader basically, and the other is the story of the mother and that. But it doesn't proceed in like a like a narrative, like I went here and there was a conflict kind of thing. So, but at the same time, I think it, you know, it ends up happening. And the way that I think that it works is in that shift. And I think that poems, and then also written prose too, especially when it's first person, the narrative tension, which I don't think is, at least I haven't really read this much, but comes from the voice itself and some kind of tension that's within the voice. So here, the tension is between this oscillation between the serious and the funny, and the kind of like, you're like not knowing for a while what's prompting that movement and that uncertainty moving you forward as the sort of scenes progress. And that seems to be somewhat how the movie works, and that happens in prose too all the time. I'm thinking about, it's like a George Saunders story, Winky. That's like, I think it's Winky, about some brother of who's going to some like neo stupid like self-help conference and is trying to like, you know, become confident so he can finally tell his sister that she like sucks basically, or like has been ruining his life. And but it's all very internal first person, and it's just like he's getting so like ready and he's gonna tell her everything, and then like he gets home and he says nothing and basically, oh, I had a good day, kind of. But that whole narrative logic is built into the excitement and the momentum of the voice itself, and also another, I mean, sort of a different vibe, obviously, but Lolita Nabokov's works that way in a disturbing way, where the voice itself is like very alluring and lush and linguistically exciting, and that's what's horrifying, is the tension between reading about a horrible pedophile and being in love with the person's voice, because it's like just like one of the best pieces of writing ever. So that's a good, and I think poems especially often rely on tensions within the voice because they have less space to build in other kinds of tensions, like sort of narrative conflict or something.
That's a great point. That's a really great point. And as you pointed out, part of where that tension comes from is the fact that so many of the seeds of the dark are sprinkled into the jokes. So the subject of a mother's love is a joke at first. It's like, hey, you think your mom loves you when you fart? Like, farts, right? Am I right? Farts. And the fact that it never goes away and it only deepens, but the seed is planted. Like the bits are there at the beginning if you're paying attention. And so often that is how humor functions. We're papering over something that we're uncomfortable talking about, or we're trying to put a brave face on a real pain. I feel like that works on two levels in this poem. It really does ratchet up the tension in the voice, and it also puts that layer on top of the hurt, which is so true to life, and it makes the voice feel realer because it's doing something that we ourselves often do.
Yeah, no, exactly. One thing I also love is, which I think is kind of related, is like this part, sometimes parents and children become the most common strangers. Eventually a street appears where they can meet again or not. And that, I thought it was great because the voice's flippancy allows it to actually be like super self-aware. Because on the one hand, I feel like a lesser poem, that line would end the poem. Eventually a street appears where they can meet again, where the street, which had before been a literal just like thing to talk about, becomes like the metaphor where resolution can happen between the mother and the da-da-da. But the poem is not satisfied with that, and also is suspect of its own like poetic tools, which I think is funny. But that is allowed to come across naturally because it makes sense that the poet would just be like, or the speaker would just be like, or not, like that kind of like, yeah, it's like kind of thing. And that actually, also allows the poem to push even further, where there's kind of like, well, what if, you're not ever going to come to actual terms with your parent? What if they're going to like stick with their like, intolerance and bigotry, and, you can't do anything about that. And that those sort of questions, which are really poignant. Do I have to forgive in order to love, or do I have to love for forgiveness to be even possible? And I think those are really interesting questions, and sort of can only come, I think, in a way that makes the deepest sense after we've taken all these little turns, heard the whole story, but also like had a moment where we thought we came to a resolution, and then we didn't, kind of thing.
Definitely. Yeah, I think, obviously this is not my experience, but if I was writing a poem like this, I would 100% end it with where they can meet again, because I'm not as good a poet. Because what the or not then opens up is also all of this reflection on the part of the writer, which is saying, I've doubted my own love for my mother. It's another level of contemplation than where the poem has gone so far. And it's a valuable and interesting level that really adds a whole new dimension to what the poem is addressing. And it goes into this really incredible section, as you were describing, about like, what does it take to forgive? What is there any work that's incumbent upon me to do? Like, I didn't do anything wrong, but now I'm dealing with this, like, do I need to forgive? How do I forgive? Why is this coming back on me when it's not my problem? Maybe I don't need to do that work, but maybe I value the relationship. Where do I fall in all this is a lot of the questioning that goes on there. And that's, again, it just feels so real, because that's a level that we all reach at some point, and it helps us as the stranger this individual has met to really get a much deeper insight into their thought process, and really brings out something to connect with.
Yeah, no, that's totally. That makes me think of that famous Maya Angelou quote: "If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude." Because it is kind of like. And again, this is like another thing that I feel like poems are perfect for, because it's just this one voice that's longing for something and the other side isn't there. And in a situation where the other side is resolute in its whatever it is, in this case, like, non-acceptance, what is the speaker going to change about the way that they're thinking about the situation, if the situation itself can't be changed? And I think that's really powerful. And I think really like a thing that poems, I think, are really good at, because what things that are larger, like fiction or movies, is all about, well, what can change in the situation? And that's where the excitement is. But a poem is often about, well, here's the situation, it is what it is, and the tension is, how am I going to, deal with it, or think about it, or explore it?
That's an excellent point. And as you pointed out, this is a poem that does that poetic operation so incredibly well. It lives in this scene and really plumbs it for all it's worth.
Yeah, I know, it's so good. God damn.
Yeah. Um,
And the last thing that is just, it's for me, I'm so impressed by it because I want to like the danger of the colloquial voice in poems is that it takes up so much space. Like you have to waste seemingly so many words establishing this is like a loose diction because people just ramble and like people just like say random dumb stuff that seems like it doesn't mean anything. And to be convincing in a colloquial sense, you have to perform that. And so the poem has to have that, oh, hello, and has to have all those like little like thought, like I'm afraid of jelly beans kind of thing. But it's tough because you also in a poem want to be the most economical that you can, and so you don't want to waste anything. And so it's really hard, I think, to be this kind of casual and still be like potent. But I think what's so good about it is that it uses all of its casualness for its potency. Like everything that is seemingly extraneous, it makes use of in a different way further along.
Definitely, yeah. It really weaponizes the humor and the voice, and really uses that colloquial voice to amp up the humor, which there's an explicit purpose to within the poem. It's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, shall we read it again?
I think we got to do it.
All right, reading it again. Poplar Street by Chen Chen. Oh, sorry. Hello. Are you on your way to work too? I was just taken aback by how you also have a briefcase, also small and brown. I was taken by how you seem secretly to love everything. Are you my new coworker? Oh, I see. No. Still, good to meet you. I'm trying out this thing where it's good to meet people. Maybe beyond briefcases, we have some things in common. I like jelly beans. I'm afraid of death. I'm afraid of farting, even around people I love. Do you think your mother loves you when you fart? Does your mother love you all the time? Have you ever doubted? I like that the street we're on is named after a tree, when there are none, poplar or otherwise. I wonder if a tree has ever been named after a street, whether that worked out. If I were a street, I hope I'd get a good name. Not Main or One Way. One night, I ran out of an apartment down North Pleasant Street. It was soft and neighborly, with pines and oaks. It felt too hopeful after what happened. After my mother's love became doubtful. After I told her I liked a boy, and she wished I had never been born. After she said she was afraid of me, terrified I might infect my brothers with my abnormality. Sometimes, parents and children become the most common strangers. Eventually, a street appears where they can meet again. Or not. I've doubted my own love for my mother. I doubt. Do I have to forgive in order to love? Or do I have to love for forgiveness to even be possible? What do you think? I'm trying out this thing where questions about love and forgiveness are a form of work I'd rather not do alone. I'm trying to say, let's put our briefcases on our heads in the sudden rain and continue meeting as if we'd just been given our names.
This is co-host Jack Rossiter Munley. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave a review. 5 stars maybe? Those reviews help with the algorithm and are a great way for us to find new listeners. And you can put anything in them. You can write whatever you want. You can just say, oh, this is a good podcast. I like this podcast. You could be like, hey, that Connor guy, he makes a lot of good points. Jack, why is he doing this outro so long? You know, get him off the mic. And whatever you feel like writing, head on over there, 5 stars, drop in the review. Do you have thoughts about this poem? Is there a poem or poet you'd like us to cover on a future episode? Well, we'd love to hear from you. And there are tons of ways that you can get in touch with us. I mean, I guess you could drop it into an iTunes review. You could be like 5 stars. Hey, why don't you talk about insert name of poet here? But you can also send us an email. That's probably the best way to do it. closetalkingpoetry@gmail.com is our email address. Or you can find us on Twitter. I am at Jack Rossiter Munn. Connor is at Connor M. Stratton. And the show is at Close Talking. On Instagram, you can find us there too. We are at Close Talking Poetry. And we are on Facebook at facebook.com/Close Talking. We haven't gotten to TikTok yet, and we might never. Who knows? Anything's possible. Speaking of all those social media platforms, a very special thank you to our incredible social media manager, Corey Chena, who keeps us active across the internet. And a thank you to all of you for listening. We will see you next time.